With 2017 winding down, it's time to look back at some of my favorite comics from the year. And as always, there are so many great books to discuss. Whether it's from Marvel, DC, or anything from the various independent publishers out there, it's been a great year to be a fan of comics. Just keep in mind one thing: unlike a traditional favorites of the year countdown, this list will be based on my favorite comics that I've read in 2017, not by release date. So everything is fair game, any comic in any format from any year. If it's a comic that I've read and I enjoyed it, then it's eligible. So if you're looking for some last minute comics to pick up before the new year, this is the list for you. Number 10, Kill or Be Killed, by Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, and Elizabeth Breitweiser. Unlike other entries on this list, Kill or Be Killed was read in the single issue format as opposed to my normal wait for the trades approach. The choice has made it difficult to compare it to other books, but regardless, this comic was consistently one of my favorites to read month in and month out. The story centers around Dylan, a troubled grad student who spends his nights killing criminals out of necessity, for reasons that are best left vague for you to appreciate when you have the chance to read it for yourself. The vigilante genre, while typically straightforward, is given some much-needed complexity through its unlikely lead character. He's not a cop with a chip on his shoulder or a grizzled veteran. This is just a kid who's trying to find his place in the world and is in way over his head. Dylan struggles with balancing his friends and school along with his nightly activities, oftentimes questioning his own sanity as he does it, making for cerebral experiences engrossing from beginning to end. The entire creative team has brought their A-game to this one, which is no shock given the pedigree behind this. From Ed Brubaker's stellar characterization and pacing to Sean Phillips' detailed line work and backgrounds and characters, especially with their expressions, and to cap it all off with Elizabeth Breitweiser's gorgeous colors, and you have yet another brilliant comic from one of the best creative teams in the business. Number 9. Iron Fist Volume 1, Trial of the Seven Masters, by Ed Brisson and Mike Perkins. Ed Brisson and Mike Perkins' Iron Fist Volume 1 is the latest in a long line of quality Iron Fist stories this past decade, making it into one of Marvel's most underrated properties. In this story, Danny Rand is a wandering drunk, searching for meaning after losing the means to tap into his chi, which brings out the powers of the Iron Fist. He's approached by a mysterious warrior with a chance to regain his chi through entering a martial arts tournament on a reclusive island. But Danny soon discovers the inhabitants of the island have more nefarious plans for him, and must fight his way through an island filled with deadly martial arts masters who have their own connection to Kunlun. This comic flat out rocks. Ed Brisson and Mike Perkins consistently bring the goods each and every month, with an emphasis on delivering jaw-dropping action sequences, making this arguably the most kung fu-centric of the modern Iron Fist series thus far. With that in mind, Brisson still finds room to inject plenty of quiet moments for us to appreciate Danny's internal struggle, apart from the numerous life-or-death encounters he experiences throughout. The concept of Danny's worthiness, or lack thereof, to be Iron Fist is addressed head-on in a manner that fans of the character and even detractors of the Iron Fist Netflix series will appreciate. Arguably the MVP of this comic has to go to Mike Perkins. The guy was clearly born to draw an Iron Fist book, showcasing a mastery of making each and every fight sequence into a standout moment, oftentimes incorporating a dozen plus panels into a single page to detail the two kung fu masters at their finest. One particular page even has 25 panels on it, not on a 2-page spread, mind you, on a single page. The energy Perkins has brought to this project is electric, and that passion crackles onto each and every page. There's a very real chance that this could be in my top 5 by next year if the creative team is able to keep making issues at this level of quality. Number 8. Daredevil vs. Punisher Means and Ends, by David Lapham. Daredevil vs. Punisher Means and Ends was more than likely a major influence on the Daredevil and Punisher dynamic in Daredevil Season 2, with its deconstruction of Daredevil and Punisher's approaches to fighting crime and exposing the strengths and faults with their worldviews. Only the comic is much better with its execution. The comic details Daredevil and Punisher's collision course as each attempts to oust the crime lord Hammerhead from being the new kingpin of crime, along with their influence on a troubled teenage boy in Hell's Kitchen. Writer-artist David Lapham cycles between these three perspectives, giving each one their own share of gravitas and dimension. We feel the heat on Punisher as he attempts to lay low and avoid the hotbed of mob and police activity his presence is stirred up. We feel Daredevil's desperation to take down Hammerhead and Punisher before the escalating violence tears Hell's Kitchen apart. And surprisingly, we feel the most from Martin, a kid who's caught in the middle of the two's war over Hell's Kitchen, and is grappling with feelings of helplessness over not being able to protect his father and sister from the mobsters shaking them down for protection money. These threats culminate into an explosive finale that ends on a wonderfully tragic high note. The art from Lapham is bound to be one of the most underrated aspects of the book. His art style is gritty but not stylized. His characters feel like real people, and in superhero comics that's not always what people are looking for, but it's perfect for this story. Better yet, the storytelling prowess Lapham displays here is second to none, with easy-to-follow panel layouts that deliver every single time. Number 7. Sex Volume 5 by Joe Casey, Peter Kowalski, Brad Simpson, Russ Wooden, and Sonia Harris. How the hell can I describe this comic? Seriously, just saying the title would be enough for a good chunk of people to think I've lost my mind. But for those of you who are left, Sex by Joe Casey and Peter Kowalski has been one of my favorite comics Image has been publishing for the past 4 or 5 years. There's simply nothing else like it out there in the market, and given the rise of independent comics since 2012, that's really saying something. The premise for this comic is essentially if Batman retired from being Batman after his Alfred's dying wish was for him to live his life. So Simon retires from being the Armored Saint and attempts to actually run his company instead of using it as a front for his costumed nightlife, along with opening himself up sexually after being closed off from it for 15 plus years. Other threads that build involve this universe's version of Robin infiltrating a notorious street gang, a gang war between two of Saturn City's most infamous supercriminals, this universe's Catwoman running a prostitution ring and her flirtatious relationship with Simon, and many more. While Simon is the main character's sex, this is in many ways an ensemble comic with a meticulous pacing that emphasizes character building over plot progression. Something you see in Volume 1 doesn't necessarily pay off at the end of Volume 1, or even Volume 2. In some cases, it could take till Volume 4 for it to fully pay off, which is what makes Volume 5 so difficult to discuss as an individual entity. Plot threads continuously develop and fascinate me, with deepening characterizations and insights into what makes them tick. To address the elephant in the room, Sex handles its sexuality in a similar manner to HBO, where you constantly see it going on in characters' lives. The nudity is graphic for both male and female characters, yet never feels overly sexualized. It's simply treated as an everyday part of life, and as such, is something that is used to explore these characters in ways that Joe Casey and Peter Kowalski would not be able to explore within a standard superhero comic. Kowalski and the rest of the art team make this into one of the most stylish books on the market, with everything from the pencils, inks, colors, to even the lettering and design, all top-notch. The phrase that's used at the start of every trade best sums it up. This one's a real motherfucker. Number 6. Tokyo Ghost Volume 2 by Rick Remender and Sean Murphy. Tokyo Ghost Volume 2 is a short and sweet finale to a stellar comic series. Rick Remender and Sean Murphy both were clearly having a ball with this science fiction action tale, perfectly balancing thrilling action and satire with a hard-hitting series of emotional moments. The toxic relationship between Led Dent and Debbie is further explored and given an emotional conclusion to wrap up their story. The remainder of the plot will be kept vague for those who want to experience this bold science fiction setting for themselves. The main selling point for this comic has to be the artwork, however. This is easily one of the most gorgeous comic books of all time, whether it's crowded metropolises or the natural beauty of Japan, to even his character designs. Sean Murphy kills this book. His action has always had a kinetic bang to it, but this particular project might showcase his finest action sequences yet. Throw in Matt Hollingsworth's outstanding colors to the mix, and you basically have visual perfection. Number 5. The Milkman Murders by Joe Casey and Steve Parkhouse. Joe Casey and Steve Parkhouse cracked the top 5 with one of the most disturbing comics I've ever read. For those who want a more detailed analysis on the comic, feel free to listen to my review. But in short, this 4-issue comic is a brutal deconstruction of the classic suburban fantasy of the house with the white picket fence, loving husband, and happy kids. Stay-at-home mom Barbara yearns for that perfect existence while suffering abuse after abuse from her alcoholic husband, adulterous daughter, and sociopathic son, all culminating in an incident which forces her into a breakdown which incorporates Casey's penchant for the trippy with a horrific spin to it. The escalation of Barbara's retribution was genuinely dreadful to experience. thanks to Parkhouse's visceral art style, which caused me to constantly grimace at the brutality of his pages. This is not for the squeamish, but if you're looking for a disturbing horror book to check out, then you've come to the right place. Number 4. Deathstroke Rebirth, Volumes 1 and 2, by Christopher Priest, Carlo Pagulayan, Joe Bennett, Cary Nord, Denise Cowan, and Larry Hama. Christopher Priest and Company's Deathstroke run is yet another brilliant comic that I've had the pleasure of reviewing for this channel, so feel free to listen to that if you want a more detailed analysis once again. As it stands, I was convinced for a long time that this series was going to be my number 1. Its layered portrayal of Slade Wilson, the supervillain merc with a keen tactical mind, was on full display with Christopher Priest at the helm, and Slade's dynamics with his wife and children in the past and present day were endlessly engrossing, with each issue adding a new wrinkle to the proceedings. The action is grounded within the superhero landscape of the DC Universe, but still equally thrilling, and plots from volume to volume are remarkably tight, fitting an incredible amount of plot progression and character moments in. Certainly more than you would expect to find within a traditional 6-issue trade. That's where Priest and the various artists of Carlo Pagulayan, Cary Nord, and Joe Bennett, among others, truly excel, making each and every issue count. Finally, the Chicago one-shot from Volume 2 was truly an exceptional comic that blended the topic of gun violence into a thrilling comic book with exceptional artwork from Denise Cowan and Bill Sienkiewicz. I honestly never expected a Deathstroke comic to make my top 10 comics of the year list, let alone top 5. But the best comics around are usually the ones that surprise you with their quality. So big shout out to the entire creative team and DC for putting out one of my favorite superhero comics of the year. Only one other superhero book was able to eclipse it, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Number 3. Deadly Class Volume 5 by Rick Remender and Wes Craig. Deadly Class Volume 5 is a book I refuse to give many details on due to the nature of Volume 4's bombshell ending. The gist of the series, however, is this. A homeless teenager, Marcus, is recruited into an exclusive school for assassins and learns the trade while involving himself in plenty of interpersonal hijinks in the 1980s. That's a love letter to the pop culture from that era, with references to various bands, comics, films, and fashion from that time. It also happens to be one of the most unflinching coming-of-age comics in recent memory, with a tone that can have hysterical jokes on one page, only then to have the comic rip your heart out with an intense dramatic scene. 5 trades in, and Rick Remender and Wes Craig continuously find new ways to top themselves with both the story and the artwork, making it one of the outright best comics on the stands today. Volume 5 in particular makes the bold decision to introduce several new characters, ranging from a Satan-worshipping metalhead from East Germany, a Vietnamese rockabilly, an Irish kiss-ass, a Native American skate punk, and a hammer-wielding refugee from a war-torn nation in Africa. These new characters immediately stand out as compelling in their own right, and mix well with the already established cast. And for those of you who have read Volume 5, the last issue's follow-up to Volume 4's ending was easily one of the biggest fuck yeah moments in comics this year. Buy this book. Number 2. Annihilator by Grant Morrison and Fraser Irving. Normally Grant Morrison isn't my thing, but this comic sure as hell made me reconsider that opinion. Try this concept on for size. Ray Spaz, a washed-up screenwriter with pressure from the studio to deliver another hit film, is diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. Soon after, he is visited by the fictional lead character of his screenplay, who implanted him with the tumor, which will kill him if he doesn't finish the screenplay within a short amount of time. Annihilator is a brilliant metatextual tale of the storytelling process, with its lead character writing the meta-story of anti-hero Max No-Max in the screenwriting sections and arguing with Max over the various decisions Ray makes his story, which have very real implications on the real world as he writes it. That's only a small snippet of the madness contained within this comic, and it's easy to get lost in this engaging story, especially for those of you who are writers. What's especially nice is that they approach this comic in a not-so-typical way when it comes to standard stories about writers, mostly when it comes to dealing with writer's block. Ray is burnt out, sure, but it's more of a result of the personal decisions he's made, which also find their way into both the meta-story and this story as it progresses. Ray is wonderfully charismatic and flawed, and the pairing with his creation Max lead to many hysterical moments. Then there's Fraser Irving's art, which is a pure tour de force. Each of his pages are an atmospheric treat that must have taken considerable amount of time to pull off, judging from the level of detail, but it was well worth the wait. The horror scenes on the spaceship in particular were a major highlight for me. If you're like me and you're hesitant to jump into Grant Morrison's more out there comics, consider this to be a good entry point into that body of work. Number 1. Aquaman Volume 8 and Aquaman Rebirth Volumes 1 through 3 by Dan Abnett, Vicente Cifuentes, Brad Walker, Scott Eden, and Felipe Briones. I mentioned with Deathstroke Rebirth how the books that surprise me with their quality tend to be the ones that leave a lasting impression, which perfectly sums up Dan Abnett and Company's Aquaman run. The series that threw a stone into my top 10 list at the last minute, forcing me to reevaluate the whole thing, with it ultimately taking the number 1 spot for itself. I've been dying to talk about this run, guys, but I'll keep this as brief as I can since I fully intend on reviewing this later on down the road. The elevator pitch for the series is that Arthur Curry, the Aquaman, opens up Atlantis' surface world through the construction of its own international embassy building, the Spindrift, in hopes of lessening the tensions between the surface world and Atlantis. This, however, leads to a series of escalating conflicts between the two sides, as various factions within the two attempt to prevent such a dream from being realized, with one in particular attempting to plunge Atlantis into war with the United States. Aquaman under Dan Abnett's pen has a wonderful mix of political intrigue, bombastic action, interpersonal drama, and addressing the surface world's view of Aquaman head-on as both a joke and a threat to the world. There's a serious escalation in tension throughout the series, particularly in volumes 1 and 2 of the Rebirth line. Whenever you think things couldn't get any worse for Aquaman, Abnett and Company find a way to raise the stakes even higher. The attention to the long-term plotting of the series is also top-notch, with numerous threads being set up, some that pay off immediately, while others are left to simmer for future arcs. I love it when a run can strike that balance just right, and this is easily one of the better examples of how to handle it in superhero comics. Even the characterization of Arthur is stellar. He's a well-realized and flawed character in his own right, who you want to see overcome the overwhelming odds that are stacked against him. On top of that, you also have Mera, who is easily one of the best female characters in superhero comics, and their relationship together is also one of the most underrated at DC. The 3-man art team who did the majority of the series together are a bunch of workhorses and have to be commended on maintaining the book's bi-weekly schedule. Of the 3, I'd have to say Brad Walker was my favorite, due to the intricate level of detail he brought to his issues, especially during his dialogue scenes. But even Scott Eden and Felipe Briones absolutely rock this comic in their own right. Plus, each of their styles blend remarkably well, which is essential when on a bi-weekly comic. I'm going to stop myself there so I can save some praise for the reviews to come, but Aquaman hit me at the perfect time in my life, giving me the perfect combination of escapist fun, layered characterizations, one of the best romantic couples in comics, and a pulse-pounding tension that left the book stuck in my head long after I finished reading it. Seriously, if this keeps up, this could legitimately become one of my favorite superhero runs of all time. And that concludes this top 10 video. Hope you guys had a good time listening to me ramble about some of my favorite comics of the year. And I sure do appreciate you guys watching it. Also, feel free to, if you enjoyed it, to like this video, share it with some of your friends if it's something they might enjoy as well. And also feel free to comment on your favorite comics of the year, whether it's following my stipulation or, whichever one you really feel like following. I'd be curious to hear what books you enjoyed. And also, if you're watching this on Saturday, December 30th, feel free to tune back in on Sunday, December 31st for Patch's top 10 favorite games of 2017. So we both got ourselves a top 10 favorites of the year list coming right before the end of the year, right on time. We were kind of cutting it a little close, but we made it. So thank you guys as always for watching, and we will see you again soon.